Settingnya sudah mulai ya. Siap.
Oke, siap, sudah di-record. Berarti setelah ini aku admit ya, Mbak Doroti, nanti siap-siap ya, Mbak. Oke, bismillahirrahmanirrahim, semoga lancar.
Okay, mari kita mulai acara kita hari ini. A very good day to everyone who is joining us today wherever you are. Welcome to ISIC Parallel Session 3 on Education. In this session, we will discuss Indonesia's education sector in combating the education crisis during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. This event is sponsored by BNI London branch, the University of Nottingham, and the Indonesian Ministry of Tourism and the Creative Economy. Before I go any further, allow me to open this session with a pantun. Pohon rindang tempat berteduh, bertengger di dahan sepasang merpati. Kita boleh merantau jauh, tapi Indonesia selalu di hati. In Indonesian, we have a saying, tak kenal maka tak sayang. Therefore, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Dorothy Ferrari, your moderator for this session. I'm currently finishing my PhD studies at the UCL Institute of Education, where I also work as a lecturer for the BA Education Studies program. Joining with me in this session, we have three distinguished speakers. Our first speaker is Mas Anindito Aditomo, PhD, who is the head of Agency for Research, Development, and Book Affairs of the Indonesian Ministry of Education, Culture, Research, and Technology. He was a former senior research fellow at the Center for Education and Policy Studies, PSPK. Our second speaker is Ms. Nisa Faridz, PhD, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Education and Policy Studies, PSPK. She is also leading the PSPK team supporting the Indonesian Ministry of Education, Culture, Research and Technology to reform learning throughout Indonesia. Last but not least, our third speaker is Professor Fazli Jalal, who is Director of Yasi University. Professor Jalal is former Indonesian Vice Minister of National Education, who previously served as Indonesia's Director General of Higher Education. All three speakers will give 20 minutes presentations before we open the floor for questions and answers. If you have any questions during the presentation, please write questions in the chat. During the Q&A sessions, depending on the time, I will read selected questions for the panelists to answer. Now, without further ado, I would like to invite Mas Anindito to give his presentation.
Terima kasih, selamat malam, selamat pagi ya di UK. A very good morning everyone, or evening, depending where you are. Thank you very much for the invitation, Mbak Dorothy. I don't think I will take up 20 minutes, but let me start anyway. Okay, just checking whether my screen is visible.
Yes.
Okay. And allow me to turn off my video during the presentation to save up some bandwidth. Okay, so as we speak, Indonesia is currently facing a devastating second wave of COVID. So I would like to first convey my prayers to all of us who are affected by this pandemic. I would like to share with you some points regarding how the Indonesian government has responded to the pandemic, as well as opportunities going forward. So the COVID pandemic has caught all of us off guard. Educators, policymakers, parents, students, teachers, not only in Indonesia, but I think everywhere in the world. Before COVID, most teachers did not imagine having to teach remotely. Most teachers did not imagine having to teach without the face-to-face interaction and the sense of control that it brings. Before COVID, many teachers did not imagine having to determine students' grades and to decide whether students meet the requirements for graduation without the use of proctored pencil and paper exams. Before COVID, most students could rely on their teachers to structure and monitor their learning. And before COVID, many parents had little idea about their children's learning, and many parents did not imagine that teaching is such a challenging task. So indeed, COVID has become a huge disruptor of education practice across the globe. And hence it demands emergency responses, but also it is an opportunity to rethink education more fundamentally. In Indonesia last year, when the first wave of COVID hit, we responded with a few emergency policies. First, we simplified the curriculum. We reduced the content of the curriculum to focus on foundational competencies. The government also relaxed grading policies, which before was quite cumbersome and detailed. We also provided many modules, literacy and numeracy modules for teachers and parents to use at home. The government also provided internet data packages for students and teachers. We also created online learning and peer sharing platforms for teachers. Just to give you a sense of the scale of the challenge in providing learning opportunities for students and teachers, this is the number of teachers who have utilized the teaching and what we call Guru Berbagi and Guru Belajar platform, the teacher sharing and learning platform. Hundreds of, I think there's more than 1 million unique users currently using the platform. And for many of the specific teaching modules, many hundreds of thousands of teachers have participated. This scale of teacher learning was previously unimaginable. Before COVID, before online learning, reaching this number of teachers in a span of a few months was unimaginable. At the moment, we are also preparing schools to reopen. We believe that remote teaching and learning is not a viable option for most students, for most teachers, and most schools. Remote learning is especially challenging for students who come from lower income families, who don't have the necessary facilities at home, and whose parents often lack the time and skill to tutor their children. So the government we are doing our best to prepare schools to reopen, to provide blended modes of learning, a combination of offline sessions with remote learning. Among the requirements to reopen a school is that teachers in a school need to be vaccinated, fully vaccinated. With more than 5.6 million teachers and education personnel across Indonesia, this is obviously a huge challenge. As of May, a couple of months ago, we've managed to vaccinate 30% of that 5.6 million people. We also require teachers, students, and education personnel, school personnel, who have higher risk of becoming seriously ill due to comorbidity, to stay at home and work from home or study from home. And importantly, we are giving parents the right to decide whether or not to use the offline sessions offered by their schools. So at the end of the day, the decision is contextualized, is tailored to the individual needs and situation of the students and the school. But of course, school reopening depends on how well we are able to control the pandemic in the larger community. So in areas with high levels of COVID cases, schools obviously are not allowed to provide offline services. Judging from the current situation, the pandemic the challenge presented by the pandemic will be relevant for a long time to come. Along with another existential crisis, climate change, and the Industrial Revolution, many socio-cultural shifts will happen, which means that our children will live in a future that is very, very different from what we have known in the past. So, given this situation, we will need future citizens to be creative problem solvers, to be critical thinkers, to be excellent communicators, and to be collaborators who can work across teams, across cultures, across nations. And the question for us in the government, for us as educators, is that how can we design an education system? How can we design a curriculum, teacher education, and other aspects of the system to focus on the development of such foundational and transversal competencies? I look forward to the discussion later on. I will leave it at that and over to you, Mbak Dorothy. Thank you very much. Selamat malam. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Right. Thank you very much, Mas Anindito, for the presentation. It gives like a general overview of what the government has done, has prepared and planned for the upcoming opening of a new academic year. Now, I would like to invite Mbak Nisa to give her presentation.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Dorothy. Allow me to share the screen. Thank you again for this opportunity. Amidst these difficult circumstances, I'm very happy to be able to see some familiar faces and also getting to know more scholars of Indonesia across the world. Thank you again for the opportunity. Just to be, okay, wait, okay. So is my screen visible now? Because it's not very
Yes, it is.
Clear. Okay, so allow me to stop my video as well because I'm not very sure that the bandwidth is good enough. Okay, so this evening, okay, it's evening in Jakarta, but good morning everyone. And in this opportunity, I would like to discuss a little bit what PSPK or Pusat Studi Pendidikan dan Kebijakan has taken part in the pandemic learning in Indonesia and especially in Jakarta. So early on, Mas Nino already explained that remote learning is not a viable option, especially for children from the lower socioeconomic status, but also from many parts in Indonesia, perhaps. But at this point, I would like to focus on Jakarta. And I think it's important to point out that Jakarta may not be, or perhaps it's not supposed to be compared to other parts in Indonesia. And I will explain later why we should be careful in generalize this context of Jakarta. So Mas Dino in his presentation says that many teachers are not prepared. Many students are unprepared as well. But I would like to say as well, I would like to add one more list there, is that most researchers or education advocates like PSPK are also unprepared to do the systematic studies about what we should do during this pandemic. What should we advocate to the government during the pandemic, because it's very sudden, and what we need to do is like we need to prepare for learning for tomorrow, not for next academic year or not next year, but for tomorrow, for the next day at that time. So just to give a little introduction about our organization. So Pusat Studi Pendidikan dan Kebijakan, or Center for Educational Policy Studies, based in Jakarta, is an independent non-profit foundation. So it's very important to point out that we are not part of the government, but we are independent non-profit foundation. We are committed to stand on children's side in advocating for policies. So we are the organizations that it's like public policy research and advocacy, but we are focusing only on education policy. So PSPK working with government, we are currently working with very closely with Ministry of Education and Culture, as well as Ministry of Religious Affairs, because as we know that madrasah is under the Ministry of Religious Affairs, and also with Bappenas and other lembaga institutions, government institutions, and also with pemerintah daerah or district office. In relation to this topic, since March 2020, we have been working hand in hand with Dinas Pendidikan or District Office of DKI Jakarta in supporting schools and teachers to ensure that all children can learn during the pandemic, and also schools are ready for opening. So PSPK and Dinas Pendidikan Jakarta actually has been preparing assessment. It's like a self-assessment for schools, for teachers, and for the students and the family, to check their readiness for learning, as well as readiness to return to schools since March. But until today, of course, the assessment is not resulted in school opening yet because of the issues that we're still having today. Just to give a little background or what's going on in Indonesia, and the highlighted ones are in the Jakarta context. So start from March, we remember at that time that the schools, face-to-face sessions in schools are canceled. And at the time, the pemerintah provinsi, the district office, they invited us and asked, what should we do? The teachers still need to teach tomorrow. How can we help them? And I remember at that time, we work hand in hand with the Dinas office, with the district office, preparing how to teach using WhatsApp. Because it's the most popular chat applications used by so many teachers. I think all teachers use that in Jakarta. So we are developing like prototypes how to teach using that WhatsApp. And then, I mean, while the at the national level, the policies are developing. For some areas, they are allowed to open the schools and so on. But in Jakarta, because it has always been a red zone, school hasn't been started. Only in May and June this year, the assessment was used for trials. So we started trials for only like a week or so. but then we had to stop the trial because of the spike of COVID cases in Jakarta. So at this moment, we can only say that for the next academic year, for this upcoming academic year, which some schools started tomorrow on Monday, the full distance learning will still be applied in Jakarta. But actually, since May, since we saw that we started the trial, we started to do the assessments. All schools started to fill the assessment. We in PASPECA started to raise the questions. This is a part of the study that we just started. Our big question is that what's going to happen after this? So is it just like a swing of pendulum that it's going to stop? Are we going to back to the business as usual? Will school go back to what they've always been doing in terms of teaching and learning process? Or should we keep the digital learning? So that is the big questions that we try to answer, and also the questions related to how can we keep the momentum to use technology in learning. So we start to discuss with the Forum OSIS. This is a student governing body. There's a Forum OSIS DKI Jakarta. We invited some of the leaders. It's very interesting to hear their perspectives about this. And also we discuss with the facilitators of teacher professional development. We had a discussion with Sekolahmu and Revo. So if we talk about the readiness, actually Jakarta is more than ready in terms of the infrastructure. If we take a look into the Information and Communication Technology Development Index, Jakarta is the only province in Indonesia who is considered in high readiness or high development index, with the development score is 7.51. And compared to the national level, 95% or most of the youth in Jakarta, they have a basic ICT skills. And according to the assessment that we had with the Dinas Pendidikan, over 70% of the schools in Jakarta, the majority of teachers use chat apps and video conference for teaching and assessment. So the bandwidth issues, the quota data, and so on, the connection issues, it's not very big issues in Jakarta actually, compared to other regions in Indonesia. However, if we take a look into all the references related to teaching with technology, access is only the first step towards the transformation. So if we want to transform our education, like Mas Nino presented earlier, it's only the first step. It's not enough. It's the first step is, how about the second step? The second step, we considered that the teachers start to change the paradigm. But unfortunately, based on our data, based on our findings, the teaching approach remained the same. So even though the technology is there, teachers still use lecturing, teacher-centered, and textbook-oriented teaching. The data that we found at the high level of video and chat applications used for synchronous learning. So teachers are still depend on synchronous learning or scheduled learning, where students has to present during the Zoom time. And even when they use WhatsApp, there's a scheduled for WhatsApp classes. So, and it's full of one-way instruction, like of teachers, students interactions, as well as students interactions. It's very interesting to hear the student stories about how teachers muted them several times because, you know, the teachers want to make sure that all students listen to them. Meanwhile, actually, when they are muted, they play YouTube on their cell phones next to their laptops. That's the one of the issues we found. We heard from the students, and also in about 70% of schools, majority of teachers refer to textbooks. So even though the Ministry of Ed already released a simplified curriculum that with reductions in some learning standards, but teachers still relied on textbooks they used before or prior to the pandemic era, so that they didn't really use the new standards, the one that is simplified by the government. And the other issue about that is that while actually the technology provide more avenues for children and more references available there, but teachers still rely on textbooks so much. So it's not, the flexible learning was not really happening in Jakarta. And these are the voices from the students that shows that, like in many parts of the world, Jakarta shares two major problems related to teaching and learning in pandemic era. One is learning loss and the other is learning gap. About learning loss, students shared the lack of engagement. They just take the attendance, but then some of them already close their screens and then go back to sleep. Learning is not meaningful. The assessment, the test is meaningless for them. Even the students said that we're just playing safe. We just need to survive this. So we know that all the assignments are already there. The answer, you can just go to, I forgot the website that they mentioned, that they could find all the answers of their teachers' tests. So everybody got a good grade, but that doesn't mean anything. We don't feel proud about our grades. That's what they say. And for students who are more motivated, the motivation relies greatly on individual initiatives. So some students who want to go extra mile, they went to Google, YouTube to find more resources instead of talking to their teachers. And as for the learning gap, we're talking about Jakarta. As I mentioned, that the technology is there, but the limited access, we still found the cases where children, especially from the lower socioeconomic status, they found it difficulties to get connected, not because of the internet connection, but more on the device. That's what we heard from them. They have to share devices, gadgets with parents and siblings. And also the other issues, because we also talk with the students from considered as favorite schools or high ranked schools and others. So they said that there are the learning loss occurs differently because of the teachers' competency. Some teachers are more advanced, more savvy in technology, but others are very, very difficult in using technologies. And the other part that also mentioned by the students are learning environment. Some students really enjoyed learning because they have their room for their own for learning, but for students, especially from lower economic status, they have to share the rooms with others. And my sisters also in their learning sessions. So it's very chaotic sometimes. So to quote conclusion or thesis posted by Cassis Schalberg, one of the scholars in this learning, he said that pandemic has not created any new problems actually, but it's just exacerbate or it has made existing ones more recognizable to us. So there's no really new things, it's just make it more visible to us. Given the situation, and then we asked the students, so do you think that we should continue using technology for learning, given the fact that the experience they had? And they agreed unanimously that they want to keep using technology because it's about the time. They said they also see that this is the momentum for teachers to learn. What they expect is not to return to the teaching learning as usual, but what they want is that teachers to be more competent in teaching with technology so they can have meaningful learning. And when we ask them, what do you mean by meaningful learning? It's very interesting for us because their answers are very similar to the ones that you found perhaps in recommendation made by, let's say, international agencies such as OECD, World Bank, and so on. They mentioned about the importance of student-centered learning. They want more variety in activities, not just staring at the screens for hours. They see that the benefits of distance learning. They say that the positive side of distance learning, according to them, is the flexibilities. They want that to be more less synchronized, more independent. Interestingly, they want the teachers to trust them that they can find the answers by themselves, and the teachers just play as a facilitators. We want to go back to teachers when we need it, when we need guidance, when we have difficulties, but not all the times that we have to see the teacher's face. That's what they said. What they want is more conversations and relationships. So this is something that also mentioned in many textbooks of teaching with technology, that the teacher's role is not replaced by machine, by technology, but instead they want more human relationship with the teachers. So it requires all the change of paradigms that we heard a lot in many textbooks. So the paradigm transformation at all levels are required to ensure that pendulum keeps swinging. As we ask this especially to the teacher facilitators. We agree that the paradigm, the least paradigm that need to be transformed is the way we see what's going on today. They said that instead of seeing this as an emergency learning, we need to see this as a process of learning to be transformed. So there has to be continuity of the use of technology after this pandemic. There has to be clear pathways of learning how to teach with technology, and a roadmap for Indonesia, or for Jakarta in this case, a roadmap of technology integration in teaching and learning process. Because according to the facilitators, they found that teachers still think that their teaching with technology skills is very related to their ability to use as many softwares or applications. So they care about the number of softwares that we can use instead of how am I going to use these softwares. Students come first. This is also mentioned by teachers and the facilitators. Teachers are willing to use technology when they see the positive impact on their students. So teachers want to use the technology, but they're just afraid that it will harm the students' learning. But when the teachers see that learning using technology can help their students, their motivation to use that technology will increase. And in some schools where the parents are very, very influential, they also hope that the parents can support them in learning using technology as well. Teachers need to see that the flexible, student-centered, open-ended learning can really help students to thrive. This is according to the facilitators, because changing the highly teacher-centered to student-centered is not just about the skills. And it's not just about the teachers don't want to, but the teachers are afraid to do that because they're afraid that it will harm the learning process. It is also mentioned that not only Merdeka Belajar, as we know that Mas Menteri Nadiem Makarim put forward, but also Merdeka Mengajar, from compliance to co-creation. So there's a change of paradigms need to be made also at the national, at the government level, to see teachers, to give teachers more freedom, more focus on internal and less external accountability, and also appreciate their innovative ideas and the use of technology to promote meaningful learning. For example, that to assess the teacher's performance, technology, they say that should be a part of the assessment criteria to measure the teacher's performance. Last but not least, teachers need support. It's very interesting to hear how teachers learn technology. For example, the andragogy is very different from pedagogy sometimes, because they're adult learning and they've been doing this for years, and suddenly they have to change the learning process. This is a huge learning curve for them. They need support, and teachers mainly learn from each other. So for the government, it is expected to support the communities of practice, because that's how the teachers learning from mostly, and also believe that teachers can learn. It is somewhat proven during the pandemic, they're learning if they are supported. And like students, some teachers are learning faster and need more supports than others. So this is important for them, for the government to see that we are learning, but we cannot learn as fast as you expected. So everybody got so frustrated at the beginning, but then when we say that, okay, you can learn what's up, you don't have to learn a new thing right away, and it helps them to, just like our students, we do not expect them to run immediately, start from standing up and walking. So that's what a teacher also expect from us. I'm very happy if we can discuss further about this, Mbak Dorothy. So, but I would stop my presentation here. Thank you, Mbak.
Thank you so much for the insightful presentation, Mbak Nisa. I will now invite Professor Fazli to give his presentation.
Thank you, Dorothy. My PowerPoint is in English, and I would like to explain in Indonesia in 20 minutes. I think both of speakers already explained the macro policy from Pak Nino, and then also Mbak Nisa explained the very detailed funding in Jakarta as a capital of Indonesia. Saya akan mulai dengan bahwa krisis ini mendadak ya. Tidak ada yang bersiap-siap, demikian juga Indonesia, 180 negara mendadak harus stop ya sekolahnya, universitasnya, dan lebih kurang 1,6 miliar siswa ya terkena dampak yang luar biasa ini. Jadi ini memang sekali satu abad ya kejadiannya, jadi betul-betul unprecedented ya. Nah, tapi kalau kita lihat dari sebuah studi Bank Dunia yang baru saja dipublish tahun 2020 yang lalu, di sini nampak bahwa beberapa dampak, baik langsung maupun tidak langsung, itu kalau untuk sekolah jelas, pertama pembelajaran itu terhenti atau terganggu. Kemudian inequality daripada akses pada pembelajaran bermutu makin membesar ya. Sebelum COVID itu sudah ada, sekarang makin membesar karena berbagai pertimbangan termasuk teknologi ya. Kemudian hubungan emosional terhadap sekolah yang dulu membuat mereka gairah bangun setiap pagi itu menjadi terganggu. Kemudian di bidang kesehatan gizinya memburuk ya, banyak mereka yang di anak-anak menjadi stunting ya, stunting baru, dan sementara yang terganggu gizinya di usia sekolah juga terganggu. Kemudian kesehatan mental sangat terganggu, apalagi dengan terkungkungnya mereka di rumah mereka yang sangat bervariasi settingnya. Kemudian berbagai kerawanan-kerawanan mereka meningkat. Kita juga tahu bahwa dropout itu meningkat, diperkirakan oleh Bank Dunia di SD itu hampir 50.000 dalam 1 tahun kemarin itu yang dropout, di SMP hampir sama ya, mendekati 50.000. Kemudian mulai banyak terjadi perkawinan pada usia anak ya, dan kemudian berbagai implikasinya, dan kita tahu karena kebutuhan dana yang cukup besar untuk kesehatan, untuk ekonomi, untuk social safety net, maka pendidikan termasuk yang harus berkorban ya. Kemudian tentu pendidikan akan sangat berkurang dukungannya, guru-guru terutama guru-guru swasta yang dibayar dari pembayaran orang tua dan murid itu terganggu penghasilannya, dan banyak yang diberhentikan, dan juga banyak private school yang sudah tutup ya, atau menerima murid dalam jumlah yang jauh sangat sedikit. Nah, karena itu juga diperkirakan in the long run kemiskinan ini akan meningkat ya kan. Kemudian the human capital akan terganggu. Kita sudah punya gangguan sebelum pandemi. Kita belum mencapai kondisi human capital sebaik yang diharapkan, datang pandemi ini. Dan ini juga membuat inequality makin meningkat dan terjadinya intergenerational transfer of poverty. Jadi kemiskinan itu makin diturunkan dari satu generasi ke generasi berikutnya. Bank Dunia memperkirakan salah satu poin yang menurut kita perlu kita perhatikan adalah learning loss ya. Jadi kehilangan hasil belajar di murid itu kalau kita kaitkan dengan hasil skor PISA itu diperkirakan 16 poin ya, itu menjadi berkurang kemampuan dari anak-anak kita, terutama untuk membaca, hanya dalam pembelajaran yang terganggu antara 6 sampai 8 bulan. Nah, kalau kita lihat income earning yang menghilang karena gangguan ini cukup besar ya, setiap tahun anak-anak ini akan terganggu income earningnya hampir $400 per tahun ya. Dan ini tentu kalau dikali dengan 4,5 juta anak yang lahir setiap tahun, itu adalah lost generation yang signifikan untuk dimanfaatkan harusnya pada kondisi bonus demografi yang sudah menjadikan peluang di Indonesia ini. Nah, karena itulah kita sekarang datang second wave ya, dan ternyata makin meningkat, dan kita yang rencana sudah mau reopen dan terpaksa tutup kembali, dan tentu learning loss ini makin membesar. Ini perkiraan yang dilakukan oleh Bank Dunia, ya kita tahu sendiri betapa learning ability ya, dan kemampuan juga untuk higher order thinking skill itu banyak terganggu, dan kalau ini kita biarkan, maka skill for 21st century itu tidak akan mungkin didapat oleh anak-anak kita. Dan kenapa ini terjadi? Jelas karena pertama memang capacity daripada dukungan pada guru ya, dan kepada sekolah untuk melakukan online learning secara well prepared ini memang tidak terjadi, terutama dari sisi pedagogiknya. Kemudian juga kita tahu infrastruktur kita, baik ketersediaan listrik, konektivitas internet, kemampuan membeli kuota, adanya device, itu juga sangat bervariasi. Kemudian user friendly platform yang dipakai ya, apakah LMS-nya itu ternyata sangat bervariasi ya. Banyak sekolah dibiarkan mencari-cari sendiri LMS-nya, dan kadang-kadang di tingkat guru dia punya cara sendiri, di tingkat sekolah yang berbeda. Padahal sebetulnya minimal di kabupaten kota itu harus ada sebuah jaminan LMS yang bisa dipakai oleh semua sekolah. Jadi guru-guru dan kepala sekolah cukup jadi sopirnya aja, tapi mobilnya harus sudah disediakan oleh pemerintah. Ini belum terjadi dengan baik. Terus tadi seperti saya katakan, pembiayaan pendidikan jadi terganggu, dan tentu berbagai kemampuan-kemampuan praktek, terutama yang di bidang vokasi, itu cukup terganggu karena mereka tidak lagi dapat melakukan praktek-praktek langsung maupun permagangan. Nah, kita tahu bahwa dengan adanya online learning ini, tentu berbagai hal yang sama kita jaga dulu di ruang kelas, sama ber-AC, sama gurunya, sama body language-nya, sama dilihat, itu sekarang hanya bisa dilihat melalui layar gadget mereka. Dan kita tahu aksesibilitas mereka itu sangat bervariasi. Banyak, hampir 50.000 sekolah kita di 3T itu tidak punya sama sekali akses internet ya. Sehingga bagi mereka pembelajaran jarak jauh itu tetap luar jaringan ya, tidak punya akses jaringan. Sementara mereka juga harus naik ke bukit, naik ke pohon untuk mencari sinyal ya. Sementara teman-temannya, terutama yang di kota, dengan menikmati gadget yang banyak ya, tinggal memilih cara belajar, dan ini membuat inequality makin besar. Karena itulah kita berupaya bagaimana konten yang tadi yang demikian berat, ya kan, tadi sudah sampaikan oleh Mas Nino, ini mulai dikurangi oleh pemerintah, dipilih yang penting-penting saja, yang paling penting contextual learning ya, dan learning jadi bermakna untuk mereka di lingkungan rumah dan ekosistem mereka. Karena itu learning design-nya menjadi sangat penting, dan bagaimana menggunakan sinkronus dan asinkronus dengan online ini menjadi tantangan bagi guru. Apalagi kalau kita bicara assessment yang sangat sedikit dilakukan oleh guru-guru saat ini, sehingga mereka tidak tahu kualitas learning loss daripada anak-anak tersebut. Nah, tentu teknologi tadi Mbak Nisa sudah menyampaikan, di Jakarta sendiri cukup menjanjikan, tetapi ternyata belum termanfaatkan dengan baik. Belum lagi kesiapan guru, kita punya 3,3 juta guru ya, yang harusnya memerlukan pendampingan terus-menerus, penguatan ya, karena ini adalah hal yang baru bagi mereka. Dan tentu pada akhirnya kita bertumpu, bisakah COVID ini menjadi kesempatan bagi kita untuk memperbaiki bagaimana siswa melihat pembelajaran dirinya. Dan sebetulnya menjadi pintar itu adalah pilihan mereka ya. Kita harus membangun growth mindset di mereka ini. Kita harus berupaya kemampuan kognitif dan metakognitif mereka itu bisa didukung dengan berbagai cara di pembelajaran online tadi. Karena itu berbagai macam penugasan, bagaimana topik yang mau dibahas itu diinterpretasikan oleh mereka, kemudian mereka dimungkinkan merencanakan pembelajarannya, mana yang sinkronus, mana yang asinkronus, mana yang belajar mandiri, ya, mana yang penugasan, mana yang dengan game dan segala macam. Kemudian mereka memaksimalkan kemampuan mereka mengobservasi dan mengambil manfaat dari observasi itu dan melakukan penyesuaian-penyesuaian. Dan kemudian siklus ini berulang kembali ya dengan tema baru. Disinilah motivasi dan emosi mereka menjadi sangat penting. Engagement ini yang kadang-kadang tidak gampang dilakukan di online learning. Kami juga di Universitas Yarsi mengingatkan sekali kepada dosen dan juga guru-guru di sekolah menengah ya, bahwa mereka yang dulu adalah sumber pengetahuan utama, karena tanpa mereka murid tidak belajar, mereka harus datang ke kelas, harus mendengar dengan baik, dan penjelasan guru itu sudah cukup memadai untuk ujian. Sekarang mereka harus berpindah menjadi learning facilitator, kemudian muridlah yang harus menjadi independent learners, dan kemudian tidak harus belajar itu tatap muka, banyak cara, dan kemudian dia berpikir, dan kemudian dia mengeksekusi apa yang mau dia cari ya, dan berpikir lagi, kemudian apa yang dijelaskan oleh guru ternyata tidak cukup ya, dan dia bisa mencari sendiri ke lautan informasi yang tersedia di ujung tangannya. Karena itu kalau dulu mahasiswa atau siswa merasa bahwa ya kemampuan dia hanya ini, guru yang menentukan, karena itu dia harus rajin datang ke sekolah, hadir di kelas-kelas guru, mengikuti semua kata-kata guru ya dan catatan yang diberikan oleh guru. Tapi sekarang dia mengatakan, saya yang punya kemampuan untuk belajar, saya akan menjadi co-creator dari pembelajaran saya bertanggung jawab untuk pembelajaran saya, dan belajar tidak perlu tatap muka, dan terbukti bahwa saya bisa belajar kapan saja, tidak ada guru, dan ternyata banyak sumber pembelajaran yang tidak selalu berasal dari guru saja. Ini faktanya memang pembelajaran menjadi sangat mundur ya. Jadi hasil belajar memang terganggu. Kemudian skills dari siswa menjadi terganggu dalam banyak hal, kecemasan di dalam karakter juga ya, yang juga tidak gampang di delivery ya. Kemudian bagaimana tadi perbedaan yang sudah ada sebelum COVID makin melebar karena adanya pandemi ini, dan kemudian secara mental dan emosional mereka banyak terganggu, dan bagaimana juga tadi sudah ada lebih di sekitar 50.000 di SD, 50.000 di SMP mereka sudah drop out. Tentu pada akhirnya in the long run masa depan mereka akan terganggu. Kita tidak ingin mereka menjadi lost generation nantinya. Nah, bahayanya nanti ke perbedaan antara yang the have dan the have not yang sudah ada sebelum pandemi tercekam selama pandemi ini makin melebar, dan kalau kita tidak kompensasi ini sesudah pandemi pun ini akan menjadi sangat sulit untuk di-recover kembali. Beberapa survei yang ada ya, ini dilakukan oleh Balitbank tempatnya Mas Nino ya, bahwa ternyata pada pertengahan tahun 2020 itu memang di daerah-daerah yang relatif maju, yang bukan daerah 3T ya, itu memang mereka bertumpu pada online. Sementara di 3T mereka masih bertumpu pada pembelajaran offline ya, karena memang kasus COVID-nya belum begitu besar, tapi juga mereka tidak bisa bertumpu pada teknologi. Kemudian kalau kita lihat, ternyata cara mereka meningkatkan kemampuannya itu cukup membaik ya. Kalau kita lihat misalnya bagian bawah dari apa ini, bahwa mereka ternyata sudah mulai meminta siswa untuk mengerjakan proyek-proyek sederhana. Kalau semester yang pertama tahun 2020 itu 22% baru, itu naik lebih dari 2 kali lipat, hampir 3 kali lipat ya, sudah terjadi pada semester. Kemudian mereka juga ya melakukan enrichment, tidak hanya buku-buku teks saja. Kalau dulu mulanya mereka enrichment-nya hanya 24%, sekarang itu sudah 65%. Jadi sebetulnya di tengah berbagai keterbatasan, ternyata inovasi itu juga lahir. Dan kalau kita lihat interaksi antara guru dengan murid, kalau kita lihat yang orange itu, yang ungu itu adalah di daerah 3T, memang mereka masih bertumpu pada face to face. Tapi yang biru adalah daerah yang normal, yang biasa, mereka sudah bertumpu kepada sosial media ya. 84% mereka sudah menggunakan sosial media. Sementara di daerah 3T hanya separuh yang bisa menggunakan sosial media ini. Kemudian kalau kita lihat lagi, apa perubahan yang mendasar antara semester pertama 2020 dengan semester kedua, ternyata improve technology skills that support learning itu di daerah-daerah biasa, daerah-daerah yang relatif maju, itu naiknya bukan main. Lebih separuh guru-guru merasa bahwa sekarang skillnya meningkat. Sementara di daerah-daerah 3T itu melata di sekitar 15%. Kalau kita lihat panel bagian paling kanan, itu di daerah 3T yang ungu, itu ternyata mereka boleh dan tidak jadi perubahan apa-apa dalam learning mereka. Jadi disinilah antara contoh Jakarta yang disajikan oleh Mbak Nisa tadi, dengan kenyataan-kenyataan di lebih kurang 50.000 sekolah di daerah 3T, ini menjadi tantangan yang cukup besar bagi Indonesia. Kita juga tahu bahwa pada semester pertama tahun lalu itu, sebagian cukup besar mereka di berbagai jenjang, baik SMA, SMK, SMP, SD, itu ternyata belum bisa belajar tiap hari. Hanya belajar kadang-kadang 2 kali seminggu, ya, 3 kali seminggu. Tapi pada semester berikutnya, mulai makin tertata, makin banyak mereka yang sudah belajar penuh setiap hari, walaupun masih ada beberapa sekitar 20-30% yang belajar hanya 2 kali atau 3 kali seminggu. Artinya apa? Regularitas dari pembelajaran mulai makin membaik, ya. Dan kita tahu bahwa di daerah-daerah yang biasa itu kebutuhan terbesar mereka memang handphone, ya, gadgetnya. Dan karena itu data menjadi sangat vital. Jadi itulah dua hal yang sangat diperlukan. Dan alhamdulillah kementerian membagikan kuota gratis ya pada mereka, baik guru, baik siswa, baik dosen, baik mahasiswa. Dan kalau ini dipertahankan dan ditingkatkan jumlah dan fleksibilitas penggunaan, saya kira ini akan membantu sekali. Tapi ingat tadi yang terpaksa belajar luring, kita perlu, kalau kita lihat datanya, di daerah-daerah yang disadvantage regions, itu mereka ternyata masih memerlukan buku. Dan buku ini kadang-kadang kita tidak siap, padahal mereka bisa diantar belajarnya buku-buku bacaan, buku pengayaan, bukan buku pelajaran saja, dan mereka membutuhkan. Dan tentu mereka juga memerlukan juga data dan terutama juga gadget. Jadi hal-hal inilah yang perlu kita dukungkan kepada daerah-daerah terpencil tadi. Kita tahu ini studi lain ya cukup besar, 27.000 jumlah respondennya, untuk mencek bagaimana guru melihat pengalaman mereka dalam tahun 2020. Hanya 24% dari guru kita yang mengatakan bahwa dia merasa cukup nyaman dan less likely to spread COVID-19 ya. Ini sebelum vaksinasi ya. Jadi memang inilah yang menjadi dasar kenapa pemerintah agak hati-hati dan juga pilihan pada orang tua untuk membenarkan atau tidak membenarkan anaknya belajar. Walaupun sekolahnya sudah mulai buka, Pemdanya sudah membuka daerahnya. Tapi kita tahu secara bertahap, kalau kita lihat 37% dari guru-guru kita merasa kurang nyaman dan kurang aman. 26% merasa tidak bisa diprediksi apalagi dengan Delta varian ini. Dan hanya 12% sudah merasa sangat cemas dan tidak mungkin dia berani untuk melakukan pembelajaran online. Kita tahu masalah-masalah yang difikirkan oleh guru, hanya 24% mereka tidak terlalu mikirkan kecemasan. Mereka adalah pejuang-pejuang di garis terdepan, mereka sudah divaksinasi, dan mereka akan berupaya memberikan yang terbaik pada anak mereka, apalagi di daerah-daerah yang tidak terlalu ramah penggunaan teknologinya, tapi 60% masih cemas, dan kemudian 16% tidak mengetahui dengan pasti bagaimana harus bersikap. Nah, 95% dari guru mereka yakin bahwa sudah masanya blended learning itu dilakukan. Jadi ya online-nya diteruskan makin canggih ya, kemudian makin engage muridnya, kecanggihan guru mendeliver makin baik, mengurangi synchronize ya, memperbanyak asynchronous, dan juga menggunakan berbagai game dan lain-lain ya, sehingga menjadi sangat menarik bagi murid-murid. dan juga pelibatan orang tua ya sesuai dengan kemampuan mereka. Dan ini ada upaya terus-menerus. Karena itu Indonesia sedang bersiap, tapi datang varian Delta ini, kita kembali mempertanyakan bagaimana kebijakan kita untuk semester berikutnya ini. Nah, kalau kita lihat, mereka tetap merasa bahwa 8 dari 10 mereka yakin masker itu bisa dipakai, disiplinkan semua guru, tenaga pendidikan, dan murid ya. Kemudian mereka insya Allah hampir lebih separuh mengatakan bisa jaga jarak, tapi karena itu shift juga dilakukan, sepertiga cuma bisa belajar dalam waktu yang bersamaan. Cuci tangan itu ternyata cukup bisa disediakan, dan pengukuran body temperature juga sangat bisa disediakan oleh mereka. Dan kalau kita lihat, mereka memerlukan dukungan kita semua. Ya, orang tua, dan orang tua membutuhkan dukungan kita semua. Karena itu segala pimpinan masyarakat, tokoh masyarakat, tokoh dunia usaha ya, bahu-membahu untuk mendukung orang tua dan juga guru dengan sekolah yang sedang berupaya untuk menjangkaukan diri mereka secara efektif dan efisien kepada murid-murid mereka yang tengah gundah gulana didera oleh COVID ini. Nah, kalau kita lihat, memang dampak psikososialnya ini cukup besar. Ini kita bersyukur banyak mahasiswa-mahasiswa sekarang yang mau jadi volunteer sebagai bagian dari mereka belajar. Hampir 35.000 mahasiswa kita mau turun ke sekolah-sekolah, baik membantu teknologi maupun juga konseling ya, dan kemudian bantu guru. Mereka mengambil peran dan leadership, dan mudah-mudahan itu akan berkembang sesudah pasca COVID pun kesadaran bahwa inequality itu ada di Indonesia, membesar karena COVID, itu harus dikompensasi. Karena itulah negara merdeka harus menjamin tidak ada kemiskinan dan no child left behind. Nah, karena itu bagaimana kita menyimpulkan semester yang akan datang ini, kita bayangkan belajar dari rumah makin menurun.
Pak Fasli sepertinya masih di termute ya?
Sepertinya internetnya sempat down. Mungkin Pak Fasli bisa share kembali Pak presentasinya di conclusion.
Dan kemudian saya kira walaupun murid dan guru merasa bahwa belajar dari rumah itu ternyata tidak sebaik yang diharapkan, tapi mereka juga melihat peluang-peluang, lompatan-lompatan teknologi, lompatan-lompatan cara belajar yang lebih kaya, lompatan-lompatan perubahan mindset bahwa menjadi pintar itu adalah pilihan mereka, mereka punya growth mindset, dan kalau ini kita kapitalisasi, rasanya learning loss tadi bisa kita kompensasi secara bersahab. Karena itu mari kita tetap perhatikan protokol kesehatan, dukung semua sekolah, semua guru, jangan main-main untuk menjadikan kesehatan adalah prime mover kita untuk melakukan perencanaan. Kemudian kita tahu juga semua guru 3,3 juta itu harus dijangkau terus-menerus, harus punya mentor-mentor yang rajin mendampingi, karena ini bukan one shot training ya, ini terus-menerus. Nah, paket-paket ICT, kemudian learning platform yang sudah disediakan, dan saya bersyukur lebih 30 juta guru-guru kita melihat bahan-bahan yang ada di platform kementerian, dan juga lebih dari 7 juta sudah mendownload bahan-bahan. Nah, tapi tentu ini skewed kepada yang punya akses pada teknologi. Sementara yang lain perlu diantar dengan cara mereka masing-masing. Jadi akhirnya Mbak Dorothy, kita memang dapat bencana yang tidak pernah kita bayangkan, tapi di balik bencana ada peluang, tinggal bagaimana kita mengkapitalisasi. Mudah-mudahan kebersamaan kita demi anak-anak kita yang no child left behind, dimanapun mereka berada di Indonesia, apapun akses teknologinya, mereka harus tetap mendapatkan hak belajar, jadi mereka schooling, but also learning. Oke, terima kasih. Billahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Professor Fazli, for such an informative and intriguing presentation. Now, we already have lots of questions from our audience, so I'm going to go straight to our Q&A sessions. So I'm going to combine the questions from Raksha Latsmana from Lab School, Vanessa Ardianti from the University of Essex, Sri Windari from UIN Sunan Kalijaga, and from Yayan. So any panelists, feel free to answer this question. So the questions are, what are the benefits of online learning? What are the challenges of online learning? For example, maybe in higher education, it might be difficult to do the Tridharma University. And how can we incorporate the benefits of higher learning into face-to-face school? Any panelists would like to jump in?
Sesuai urutan tadi aja lah, ya, Mas Nino dulu, ya. Dan Bu Nisa.
Mas Nino.
Ya, terima kasih Mbak Dorothy. Saya tadi juga melihat bahwa pertanyaan dari Vanessa, Yayan, Raksa ini sejalan ya. Intinya mengajak kita berpikir ke depan. Kedepannya seperti apa sih dalam situasi seperti ini? What direction should we take? How do we rethink education? And I don't think it's not an option to go back to what we were doing before the pandemic. Right? That's definitely a non-option. In the context of Indonesia, the learning loss has already been happening for many years, even before the pandemic. Jadi kembali ke praktik yang sebelumnya itu jelas bukan pilihan. Banyak studi yang barusan terbit, studi dari teman-teman Semeru ya kayaknya, menggunakan data IFLS, menunjukkan bahwa di dalam sekolah itu tidak banyak terjadi pembelajaran. Belajar selama 6 tahun, 9 tahun, kemampuan matematikanya tidak banyak meningkat, coba. Kemampuan matematika dasarnya. Kalau kita lihat data PISA, itu longitudinal di level negara. Dari tahun 2000 sampai 2018, juga sama potretnya, stagnan. We've been very successful in providing access to students. In the year 2000, only 35% of our 15-year-olds were at school. But in 2018, that number has become close to 90%. So we've provided access to many millions of students during the past 20 years, 20, 30 years. But we haven't been that successful in providing them learning opportunities once they are in school. Right? So again, that means that as Pak Fazli mentioned, as Mbak Nisa mentioned as well, we have to look at the current pandemic as an impetus to rethink what we mean by education, as a driver to create a better system, basically. Within that system, I think we need to have several key components. Pertama, perlu ada explicit focus on developing the capacity for self-regulated learning. Ini tadi poinnya Pak Fazli Jalal juga. Dalam pandemi ini semua orang menjadi kapten bagi proses belajarnya sendiri, gitu ya. Setiap anak harus mengembangkan kemampuan untuk belajar secara mandiri. Itu bukan sesuatu yang sayangnya sudah dikembangkan secara sistematis selama ini. Kita berasumsi bahwa anak datang ke sekolah, kemudian pembelajarannya dipandu, distrukturkan oleh guru. hari ini belajar apa, besok belajar apa, minggu depan belajar apa, kapan ujiannya, dan seterusnya. Itu semuanya sudah distrukturkan oleh guru, sudah disediakan oleh guru. Tapi kalau dalam situasi yang sekarang, kita menjadi sadar bahwa guru tidak bisa dan tidak seharusnya menjadi sutradara yang mengendalikan sedemikian detail proses belajarnya siswa. Karena bagaimanapun pembelajaran itu adalah sesuatu yang harus dilakukan secara aktif. Knowledge construction itu harus dilakukan secara aktif oleh si pembelajarnya sendiri. Jadi pandemi memaksa kita untuk mengakui hal itu. Dan karena itu ke depannya kita perlu mencari cara agar guru, agar orang tua, agar kurikulum, agar pendidikan guru juga memperhatikan hal ini. Guru-guru harus punya kesempatan juga untuk merasakan, mengembangkan kemampuan belajar secara mandiri itu seperti apa, sehingga mereka juga bisa mengajarkannya kepada muridnya. Ini implikasinya banyak, mulai dari pre-service teacher training, in-service training, kurikulum. Jadi itu satu hal ya, fokus pada the capacity for self-regulated learning. To decide on one's own learning goals, to monitor one's own progress, to self-motivate when faced with challenges. Yang kedua, supaya itu bisa terjadi, kurikulumnya itu harus disimplify, benar-benar. Ya. Kalau kita mengharuskan guru, murid belajar sedemikian banyak konten setiap tahunnya, tidak akan ada waktu untuk bisa belajar secara mendalam. Tidak akan ada waktu untuk mengajar dengan kaya. Ya, otomatis guru akan menggunakan cara terbaik untuk menyelesaikan, quote-unquote, menyelesaikan kurikulum. Yaitu dengan apa? Dengan bercerita, berceramah. Itu cara paling efisien. Itu adalah respon yang rasional dari desain kurikulum kita. Jadi kita nggak bisa sepenuhnya menyalahkan guru kalau mereka sangat mengandalkan direct instruction yang tidak kreatif, gitu ya. Tidak semata itu hal yang rasional, gitu ya, dilihat dari satu perspektif. Jadi yang kedua, kita perlu kurikulum yang fokus pada kompetensi-kompetensi yang sifatnya memang fundamental, foundational competencies and characters. Kemauan kerjasama, keterbukaan pikiran, kreativitas dalam problem solving, and so on. Di Kemdikbud kita sedang merumuskan dan sudah punya model sementara, gitu ya, model yang kita sebut sebagai profil pelajar Pancasila. Ini Mbak Nisa juga banyak sekali terlibat di situ. Kita merumuskan 6 karakter dan kompetensi yang menjadi tujuan pembelajaran di setiap sekolah, di setiap jenjang. Itu yang kedua, gitu ya, kurikulum reform yang fokus pada kedalaman, fokus pada kompetensi dan karakter yang memang fondasional, yang bisa diterapkan untuk banyak konteks. Alih-alih keluasan menjejali anak didik kita dengan materi yang semakin lama semakin banyak. Itu perlu kita tinggalkanlah model-model kurikulum yang seperti itu. Yang ketiga, learning design which incorporates technology in a pedagogically sound manner. Jadi kesempatan untuk bertatap muka dalam sesi-sesi offline itu kan sangat-sangat berharga. Kita jadi sadar sekarang. Yang tadinya siswa itu datang ke sekolah berjam-jam di sekolah, seolah-olah waktu banyak, gitu ya, untuk ketemu dengan siswa setiap hari. Sekarang nggak bisa. Seminggu cuma sekali, seminggu cuma 2 kali. Jadi kita harus benar-benar memikirkan waktu yang sedemikian berharga itu digunakan untuk apa? What's the best use of face-to-face interaction? And how can technology supplement that, complement that? Itu perlu kita pikirkan dengan serius dan kemudian build into the teacher training curriculum. Yang terakhir, komponen terakhir dari sistem yang ingin kita bangun ke depannya adalah affirmative policies to level the playing field. We need to focus government resources to help those who most need help. Ya, jadi misalnya yang kemarin kita mencetak modul-modul pembelajaran hanya untuk sekolah-sekolah di daerah 3T. Kalau untuk yang lainnya ya kita sediakan secara online, kita kasih PDF-nya saja, kita sediakan website-nya, gitu ya. Tapi untuk daerah-daerah yang tidak punya akses internet ya kita harus mencetakkan. Itu penggunaan resources yang jauh lebih targeted, jauh lebih efisien juga, dan sesuai dengan kebutuhan, ya. Dan itu contoh dari affirmative policies. Kedepannya kita perlu merancang lebih banyak lagi policy-policy yang seperti itu. I'll stop at that. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Mas Nino. But Nisa, I'm going to go to you. So what do you think are the advantages, the challenges of online learning, and how we can incorporate those benefits into face-to-face teaching?
Yes, so if we listen to the students' voice, as I presented earlier, that they already mentioned several of the benefits and also the challenges. The challenge, like I mentioned in the presentation, is interestingly, it's very similar if you listen to them as well as if we read from the international agencies' report and recommendations. They want something that is flexible. That is something, the benefits that they feel. And also, but the challenge is mainly related to learning. So to assume that the students enjoy not meeting the teachers and not going to schools is false, actually, because students feels that we actually want to learn, but we don't really learn when we are just facing screens for hours. So they want something that is more challenging. They want something that is more interesting, and they could even explain to us how the teachers can better use WhatsApp to teach more interestingly. So this is very interesting, but at the other point, what I would like to also mention is that, and I'm very happy to have Mas Nino and also the people in Ministry of Education right now, the paradigm starts to switch to more empathetic, more understanding of teachers. It's very interesting, isn't it, to hear leaders in Ministry of Education says that it is understandable why teachers teach that way. You know, it's very empathetic. It's very accommodative because the contents are very, very crowded. There are so many things that students need to learn. And that's why they don't have time to do project-based learning, to teach more using the inquiry-based learning. It's difficult for them when the content are too many. And this is something that also the students mention, that they also empathetic to the teachers. There are too many contents. I understand why the teachers feels like, and they can even feel that the teachers are nervous. They were afraid that they couldn't finish the whole books in a year. So the switch paradigms, that's why I mentioned earlier that we in PSPK, we encourage or we advocate to change the paradigm at all levels, not only at the teachers level, but we need to also understand why teachers do what they do. The teachers do what they do. They don't encourage, they don't feel like it's important to use technology prior to pandemic era because there was no incentive whatsoever for them. One, the content is too many. Two, there is no appreciation for being innovative. So they don't have any reasons why they have to do that. And also, we need to also see that the paradigm at all levels is, from our point of view, working with the government. This is not a systematic research, but based only on our observations, casual observations, is that the paradigms of control are very high. So the ministry feels like they need to control the teachers. The teachers still feel needs that they need to control the students. So it's difficult to transform our learning when the paradigm of control is too high. If you listen to the teachers, when they say that, yes, I really hope that we can have a face-to-face learning, like the students also feel that way, but it's also interesting to hear the reason. Some of the teachers says that because my students don't learn when we do the PJJ, when we do the distance learning. I gave them assignment, but I'm not sure they're doing it. Some teachers even muted all the students. They are not allowed the students to close their video. You have to yeah, so it's very controlled and teacher-centered and very controlled paradigm. Meanwhile, if you want the students to be more active learning, then the students have to release that control, and it's difficult. And when you go deeper to the questions why teachers feel like they need to control the students, is because that's the only, perhaps they believe that that's the best way to learn, and they're not get used to learning using technology. And to switch to, and one other point that I would like to mention here is that one challenge of teaching teachers using technology, if we want this, I agree with Mas Nino that returning to the teaching as usual prior to pandemic is not an option. We already started with the technology and we see that there's a benefit too. So even the student says that I still want to use technology, but the teachers need to upgrade their skills. And also what's important about upgrading the teacher skills, it is so important to have the policy that really support them, not regulate them, not force them to use technologies. Because if the policies from the government still with the paradigm of control, the paradigm to regulate, then we can only see the pseudo innovation. The pseudo innovations means that I use this, I use that, I use iPad, I use WhatsApp, I use the Google Classroom, but it's still like just using it. But they can name the applications they use, but the teaching is still teacher centered. So it's very important to keep that paradigm in policy design, to support the teachers, not to regulate them so much. Maybe I stop there.
Thank you, Mbak Nisa. Now, because of the restriction of time, I would like to ask Pak Fazli Jalal, what do you think about the questions? What is the benefits, the challenges, and how we incorporate those benefits to our face-to-face learning?
Saya berhubungan dengan ribuan guru ya. Saya hampir 6 bulan berinteraksi dengan mereka, sejak mendampingi mereka bagaimana membuat RPP online, kemudian bagaimana mendesain modul-modul pembelajaran dengan online, sampai menyiapkan lembar kerja peserta didik dengan asumsi ekosistem seperti apa di rumah yang harus dibayangkan, keterlibatan orang tua. Dan saya temukan memang variasi ilmu mereka sangat besar ya, dan juga terhadap teknologi. Tapi satu hal yang saya temukan, mereka tuh haus belajar. Mereka memang tidak mau distigma, mereka tidak mau dikatakan tidak tahu atau bodoh atau segala macam. Sensitivitas ini yang perlu dijaga. Jadi kalau mereka merasa bahwa forum itu adalah untuk mereka berbagi dalam kesetaraan, mereka akan haus bertanya, mereka yang merasa punya pengetahuan dengan segala kegembiraan berbagi tanpa perlu menjadi bosi gitu ya. Nah, ekosistem ini yang perlu kita ciptakan. Dan di sini masalahnya adalah kita punya 514 kabupaten kota dan 34 provinsi yang bertanggung jawab untuk 3,4 juta guru tadi itu. Nah, birokrasi di 2 level ini memang seperti Bu Nisa katakan, mereka berpegang kepada kontrol. Karena tanpa kontrol mereka tidak punya wibawa apa-apa. Jadi akibatnya checklist administrasi menjadi power mereka. Dan itu sangat jauh dengan realita di ruang-ruang kelas. Jadi bagi guru yang ingin memfokuskan pembelajaran muridnya, sungguh-sungguh dia memperhatikan bagaimana individual murid dia kenal, bagaimana dia meyakinkan ke murid ini bisa berhasil, kemudian dia dampingi dengan segala kegairahan, murid merasa ngeklik dengan kecintaan guru pada dia, dan itu kadang-kadang jauh dari wawasan checklist administrasi tadi. Ini yang kadang-kadang makin membuat guru-guru yang inovatif kreatif itu makin jauh dari penilaian administratif tadi, karena dia dianggap tidak memenuhi persyaratan yang diharuskan, tidak rajin melaporkan, padahal dia sebetulnya di dirinya dan di pengalaman pembelajarannya dia merupakan orang-orang yang harus kita dengar dan kita alirkan ke guru-guru yang lain. Jadi sekarang pertanyaannya bagi Indonesia, bagaimana kita merubah 514 raja-raja yang merasa berkuasa penuh untuk pendidikan itu. Dia bisa memecat kapan saja kepala sekolah, dia bisa mengganti kapan saja kepala dinas, dia bisa memasukkan siapa saja tanpa melihat latar belakang pendidikan atau apapun ke jaringan pendidikan ini, dan itu wewenang penuh mereka. Di sini saya melihat betapa beratnya beban dari Mas Nadiem, karena tanpa dukungan dari Kementerian Dalam Negeri, tanpa dukungan dari orang tua yang masa depan anaknya terganggu, kalau dia biarkan sikap-sikap birokrasi tadi, maka perjalanan kita, schooling but not learning, akan tetap berjalan. Nah, mudah-mudahan dengan bos yang lebih makin afirmasi, sekolah-sekolah yang makin independen, mereka punya uang dan kekuasaan untuk mendesain sendiri pembelajaran lebih otonom, peran kooptasi daripada dinas-dinas mungkin mudah-mudahan berkurang, kita transform mereka menjadi lembaga-lembaga fasilitator, tetapi peer group di sesama guru menggunakan teknologi dan gunakan kapitalisasi karena online ini sebagai cara mempercepat transformasi dari guru kita, walaupun kita tahu mereka tidak berada pada lini yang sama, tetapi kalau ini kita teruskan secara bertahap dan secara konsisten kita lakukan, saya kira mereka akan beranjak dari satu titik ke titik yang lebih baik, yang lebih maju, dan kalau itu dikali 3,3 juta guru, itu akan jadi kemajuan learning yang sangat dahsyat. Nah, karena itu saya berharap diaspora dan siapapun ya, mari kita pikirkan bagaimana membuat akuntabilitas dari 514 kabupaten kota dan juga dari 34 provinsi ini. Kalau ini kita lakukan, insya Allah lah gerakan-gerakan yang sudah dimulai secara makro oleh Mas Nadiem, tapi trickle down-nya ini masih menjadi tanda tanya besar, karena sustainability sangat tergantung kepada kesungguhan dari Pemda-Pemda kita. Mudah-mudahan ini tidak terlalu jauh kita bermimpi, dan kita diberi cobaan dengan COVID ini. Semua orang tahu bahwa betapa rendahnya kemampuan belajar anak-anak kita dan makin terpuruk. Nah, masanya Indonesia harus bangkit, kita harus maju, kita harus atasi ini, dan dengan demikian apakah teknologi, apakah guru tadi sebagai peer group ya, yang selalu ingin belajar bersama, berbagi, dan dalam suasana egaliter, demi kecintaan mereka pada murid yang punya kemampuan yang unik dari setiap murid itu. Tapi kalau kecintaan sudah mendasari, tidak ada murid yang tidak ingin maju. Itu aja dari saya, Mbak Dorothy. Selamat berjuang. Terima kasih kepada PPI UK ini. Yeah.
Thank you, Prof. Fazli. What an interesting discussion we have had. I certainly have learned a lot from each of the speakers. Unfortunately, because of the restriction of time, I have to end our Q&A session. I know there are many unanswered questions. We will write down those questions, and hopefully we can ask the panelists to answer those questions later for us so that we can share the answers to all of our participants. Thank you, all of the panelists, for your insightful answers. Now, we're going to have a lucky draw to win a book voucher. Now, can I please have Fabi to do the lucky draw? All right, congratulations, those who got the book voucher. So please contact Punky Suryo to claim your book vouchers. I think we will do another round of lucky draw where selected participants will have the opportunity to win a laptop during the final lucky draw at the closing ceremony. But Fabi, can we now select those? Oh, right. So Ika Agustina and Swasa Karjati. Okay, can you please contact Punky Suryo to claim for to get further information about how to get the opportunity to win a laptop? And maybe Comity, can you please write it down in the chat? Yeah. Okay. All right, Dan. So remember, those who have just got the opportunity to win the laptop, make sure that you join the closing ceremony after these sessions. All right, I think that is all for today. We are now at the end of our session. Thank you very much for everyone for coming to our session. It was a great pleasure to be part of ISIC. We hope that you enjoyed the session today, and hopefully you will join us at the next Indonesian Scholars International Convention. We're now going to close the sessions, and please join us back in the closing session. Bye for now. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Terima kasih banyak.
Thank you,
Teman-teman, sampai ketemu
Thank
lagi.
you, Mas Nino. Thank you,
Terima kasih, Mbak Doroti.
Thank you,
Mas Pasli, Mas Nino, terima kasih.
Pak Nisa, Pak Nino, Pak Hasli, kalau misalnya mau kolaborasi dengan UCL, bisa kita kerjasama.
Ditunggu ini apa namanya perbincangan lebih lanjutnya ya, teman-teman dari UCL dan teman-teman yang hadir di sini. Seperti kata Pak Pasli tadi, kita harus berkolaborasi nih.
Setuju sekali.
Kontak-kontak ya, Mbak.
Iya, pasti.
Oke.
Terima kasih, pamit ya.
Banyak.
Pamit, terima kasih.